I got a couple of things I need to cover before we get started. First is the disclaimer. I'll read this. Your host tonight is the Monterey Peace and Justice Center, community-supported facility dedicated to education on peace, nonviolence, democracy, social justice, environmental sustainability. The views expressed in this meeting are not necessarily endorsed by the center, and the center's objective is to stimulate discussion and thinking on social and political issues. The center is supported by volunteer efforts and donations from all of us. To learn more about the program of the center, take one of the brochures that are at one of the front desks. And you can receive a quarterly mailing, you can receive the email messages on various meetings taking place. Anyway, the calendar's online. And the center's library and reading room are open. You can see the material around here on Wednesdays and Saturdays in the afternoons. And you're welcome to drop in for a cup of tea so you can get something. A couple of things I just want to make sure that we're doing this. We have two little sign-up sheets. What did I just say? Sorry about that. Talking too fast. Edit it out. Edit that out.
Say the sentence over.
Sign-up sheets. One is a Green Party. If you'd like to get on their email list and so on, please sign up. I'm going to pass this around. It's got a pin connected to it. I'm going to start it here just so I can reach you guys, but it's going to go back there. The other is Laura Wells personally has an email list that she's a very active, and you're going to hear a lot more about it. And if you'd like to stay connected to some of the stuff that she's doing and some of the stuff that you may be interested in that she's involved in too, it's another way of sharing information and getting, I don't know, if you're going to build anything, you need to get connected to people. This is another way to connect. So hopefully you can do this too. Thank you. What I want to do now is kind of start the program. And I have some notes. Laura Wells is unique. And if you haven't heard her before, you're gonna like this. She's been a Green Party activist for a long time. She's been an activist in general for a long time. But she grew up in Detroit. I think she went to school in Detroit at least, anyway. And she's Phi Beta Kappa, which means, if you're not familiar with that, she's smart. Okay. But she's been active because she's committed to the Green Party principles, and she's trying to put it out every way she can. She ran for the state controller's position in 2002. She ran again in 2006. She ran for governor in 2010 on the Green Party ticket. She ran for Congress recently, last election cycle, for Congress in her area. So she doesn't sit still. But what's interesting, even more so than whether you win or lose some of these battles, what do you stand for? But she got on Fox News a couple times. How many of you guys been on Fox News?
Proud to say never.
Well, you can be proud to say never, but you get exposure. You know, nothing else, you get exposure. But she was discussing tax fairness. Basically, that was her mission there. But also, she's been a precursor of other things that have taken place in this very state. And I don't know that she would describe it this way, except that what I've been reading about her, she's been advocating for publicly owned utilities for a long time.
All right.
That's right up our alley. Okay, that's one thing. She was trying to lower the margin that's needed to pass a state budget. She's been an advocate for that. Her specialty has been in finance in the past. And so running for controller and so on kind of fits. But that was... So she's ahead of the curve because she's been advocating for this for some time, and the state recently, I don't say recently, maybe 6, 8 years ago, 9 or 10 or something, they did adopt a change in the structure of the budgeting for the state of California, and now you do not have to have the 2/3 requirement for everything that takes place in the state budget. She was advocating for this way before it happened, and finally people catch on. The reason I'm saying this is because, you know, ideas that have some significance take a while to get somewhere. And somebody's got to be promoting it. And somebody's got to make sense. And somebody's got to connect the dots on how a thing makes sense for the public, for whoever. So she's been doing this for some time. So the other thing that she's been asking for is a split roll, which goes back to the Prop 13 days when everything kind of went crazy with public financing, mainly local government financing and use of the property tax. she's been advocating for a split roll for a long time. Split roll means commercial and residential are treated slightly differently, as opposed to everything being the same. And commercial, anyway, I don't need to go into this. You might, but anyway. She's been doing this. That's going to be on the ballot this next coming year. So she's a precursor there too. Precursor? What's the other? I'm having trouble tonight.
You're doing great.
They're precursor also.
Definitely cusser.
And the last thing I want to mention is that she's been an advocate for public banking. And guess what happened recently in some state law? They just passed some new legislation saying they're allowing local jurisdictions to enter, local banking institutions to enter into a public banking structure. And so another precursor cusser. Anyway, we're going to talk about ranked choice voting, and that's going to be very interesting to me, to others, I hope. And Laura, you're on. Laura. So, I called you all sorts of things. You can fix it up if you can.
Okay, I'll try to fix it up. And I was just on my way up here, I was going to grab the petition that I was going to ask all of you to sign, and somebody just picked it up and is signing it. And so let me first tell you what that is. And among all the other things, George mentioned that. But Prop 13, 40 years ago, was passed in order to help keep people in their homes, particularly seniors who were in danger of losing their homes due to rising property taxes. The governor at the time, who has just ended a few years ago his 4th term, so we won't even mention his name, but he did not do anything to solve the problem and to get it not to pass. I will mention his name, it was Jerry Brown. And so Prop 13 passed, and now there's an initiative is already approved, has gotten enough signatures to be on the ballot in November 2020. The big money is going to go against this to make the money they put against rent control and GMO labeling look like children's lunch money. It's going to be huge money, which means huge misrepresentations and huge lies. So they're doing another petition to make it even more clear that it will not hurt small businesses, because the big corporations always hide behind the skirts of small businesses. And they're going to try to do that again. So what's going around is a petition that for this second one. So I'm going to ask you to, I need to say this, it affects no residential properties, not renters, not homeowners, not vacation homes, not second homes, not even huge complexes owned by huge corporations. No residential property is affected. It's going after the big corporations. And they have a little postcard. You might not be able to see it from far away, but this is Disneyland. This is the Disneyland castle, and this is a regular house. Disneyland at this point now pays 1/8 per square foot what a typical house in California pays.
Wow.
And then just think about Chevron and all of that. When you see the petition, you'll notice that there's an image of a schoolhouse on it. You've got to remember, in order not to sign the same petition again, because that penalizes it reduces the number of signatures when they count that up. So if it's got a schoolhouse on it, and if it says increases funding for public schools, that's the one that you've signed tonight, if you sign that, okay? And I hope you do sign it. And there are a couple of them going around. And somebody asked earlier, and I'll give this information now, and I might, and if I remember, I'll give it later too. But an organization, a website that you can go to is evolve-ca.org. And a lot of the people that work with that are young people who, as I said, weren't even born in 1978. They started out working for Medicare for All, then they started working on the millionaire's tax, and then they went, you know what the problem is? Prop 13. It started the tax revolt. Reagan didn't start it, actually. It was California in 1978. Reagan was elected in 1980. Okay, so thank you very much for your attention on that. It's on the way toward taxing the rich. Now, mentioning taxing the rich, I have to say that the reason I was on Fox News, and it was actually nationwide, what's his name, Neil Cavuto. It was Fox Business News, was that the call came in that they wanted somebody who agreed with taxing the rich to talk on their program. So of course they had to come to the Green Party because there aren't, you know, the two big parties are not on the same page. And so it was about taxing the rich, and he was trying to focus everything on income tax and not on all the regressive taxes that we pay a lot more, and even income tax. So that's, I know I heard somebody say they would never be on Fox News, but I was actually glad to be on there. And at some point he said, it's interesting, I was on twice, and Neil Cavuto said, "Oh, you're driving me crazy, Laura, I love you, I'll have you on again, but you're driving me crazy." Well, he never had me on again. I drove him too crazy. But I want to congratulate you here on the California Coastal Commission, on the pressure that you all put on them to have their staff report oppose the shenanigans, and that you're going, George Riley showed me the headlines. What was it, that Cal-Am, you know, going for it for having public water. Monterey County is incredible, so congratulations on doing all of that stuff. If there's anything that's important, it's water. How long can you live without water? I always think if you're going to have a transcontinental pipeline, have it be for water. But there's some places that have far too much and some places that have far too little. And you know, if there's a spill, okay, so you know, it's not anywhere near the problem of oil, and we should use a lot less oil. So let's see, we talked about the Prop 13, Reform Prop 13 petition, and the green sign-in sheet for me. What I'm doing is I'm starting to write about like maybe one blog a month, and it's really easy to unsubscribe, but I'd be thrilled if you'd sign up, and you'll get one, and if you don't want any more, then you can just unsubscribe. No problem. I've unsubscribed from a lot of things that I really believe in and support, just because you can get too many emails, but I won't fill your inbox. I don't write that fast. So when the first one is about Venezuela. I've been there a few times, and the lies about Venezuela are enormous and huge and wide and across the political spectrum. So that's something that it's worth knowing. Now we're going to talk about ranked choice voting, and I couldn't decide whether I would first sort of give the qualified endorsement of it, or do that afterward. But I think I'll do it first. And what I want to say is that I think that adopting ranked choice voting is really a great idea. And it's something that I hope that more and more more and more cities and state, Maine, are doing it. And I hope more and more and more do it, because it cuts a little chink out of the armor of this two-party system. The one thing I would say is that somebody years ago asked Ralph Nader what he thought about instant runoff voting, which is what it was mostly referred to at the time. And he was not in favor of it because he said we really should go for proportional representation. That is what breaks up the two-party system. And so I would say always keep in the back of your mind, and keep in your mind, and try to bring it up when you can, because more than 90 countries in the world, and there are a couple hundred countries in the world, more than 90 use proportional representation. Their citizens know what it means. Very few people here actually even know what it means. Why? Because there's been a complete lockout on information and education about it. Just to put it as a relatively simple example, rather than 5 one-person districts, you have a district that has 5 people elected. If Greens get 20% of the vote, they get one of those seats. If Libertarian, if Democrats, Republicans, and so rather than having a whole Central Valley that goes Republican, the whole Bay Area that goes Democrat, you have a mix actually representing people. And that's where third parties come into it. The major countries that do not have proportional representation seem to be old colonial outposts of the British Empire. So it's the UK, the US, Canada, India, and even France doesn't have it, but which was not part of the British Empire. But some of them have parliamentary processes, which makes it a little bit easier. And you probably know that there are Greens elected in the UK Parliament and in Canada. And so there, we've got the worst of all worlds, but we're hanging in there. And one of the things that I've really been thinking about lately, and some of the things that George said in his introduction, was that the Green Party, if there's a good progressive think tank in the US, I actually think the Green Party could be nominated for that, because we bring things forward first. I mean, let's see. Who first said Green New Deal? It's the Green Party. You know, and so we're a good progressive, I mean, name some conservative think tanks. Name conservative ones.
New American Century.
Peanut.
Yeah, and Heritage, and then ALEC isn't really a think tank, but it's one of those organizations. But name some progressive ones.
Green Party.
Okay, yeah. You know, there are some. New America Foundation, I think. But the Green Party, and they're trying to kill us, of course, but it's very hard to kill us. And there's a couple of really good reasons for that. One, we're international. There's a Green Party is international. It's probably in more countries than any other political party. And we are a political party. We're not a nonprofit. We're not an alliance or an organization. We're a political party, which means we have some staying power. We have to meet certain guidelines and things like that. But we are an entity, a real solid entity that it's just hard to get rid of us. And so I know that some people switch back and forth. I'm not switching back and forth, but I know that some people do, and I think we can understand it or not, you know. I see some no and some, you know, but, you know, some people are going for the best presidential candidate the two big parties have offered in our lifetimes, you know. But by April Fool's Day, by Tax Day, by Earth Day, everybody you know that ever used to be green, please invite them back. Personal invitation. In California, because of the terrible top 2, it does not matter technically, officially in terms of what ballot you get, what you're registered for the next 3 years, the next 4 years actually, in 2024. It only matters in the presidential primary. Other than that, top 2 wiped out, you know, that's the one positive thing potentially positive thing about top 2 primary is that people can be registered green. Given what not just Greta, but a whole bunch of other people know about the environment, it's a time to make that statement, to be green. So I'm asking a lot of you here are registered green, some of you probably aren't. But invite your friends, invite yourself, be green. But Earth Day 2020, the primary is behind us, and then we've got 4 years to try to show the power of not just the environment, but the fact that we know we don't take corporate money, that's the biggest thing, but we know that the environment is connected to social justice, and we know that it's connected to the peace and nonviolence, and we also know it's connected to grassroots democracy. We know that all of those things work together. They're not just single issues. So that's my pitch for green, and I was trying to decide, should I wear my green t-shirt or not, and I thought, this sort of reminds me of Monterey. I think it sort of looks like Monterey County, so yes, I'm going to. Now, the grassroots democracy is the 4th thing that I mentioned, that, the environment, social justice, peace and nonviolence, and grassroots democracy, and that's where ranked choice voting comes in. So, ranked choice voting, my history with that is that I live in Oakland, and I've been a Green since 1992, which was when the Green Party became a political party. A friend of mine actually had a dream and said, Laura, I had a dream that you were in politics. And I said, I hate politics. And he said, check out the Green Party. It's a brand new political party. It's brand new on the ballot in early 1992, January 1st. And so I went to a party, a meeting. It wasn't really a party, maybe it was serious. But Greg Jan from Alameda County got a hold of me, and that was the end of me. So, and I've been green ever since. So 10 years later, San Francisco mayoral race. Gavin Newsom, who's now governor, was running, and the person who was running against him was Matt Gonzalez. Matt Gonzalez got something like 47% in a runoff. And that, I remember the night, at the election party that night. It was just so sad. But that was the last runoff that San Francisco had. It was an entire runoff election in early December. Because after that, they adopted instant runoff voting. So what happens, how many people, should I give a little explanation of ranked choice voting? We'll call it, I'll probably go back and forth because they started out calling it instant runoff voting and then ranked choice voting. But what it is that you can choose not just one out of a list of 5 candidates, but you can choose your first, second, and generally it's 3 choices, first, second, and third choice, or more. You can say, okay, I'm going to vote for, here's a classic example, if it would have been in 2000. People could say, I'm going to vote for Ralph Nader, #1. And of course, this would assume that we had a functional democracy and actually voted for president as opposed to the electors of the Electoral College voting for president. But you vote #1, Ralph Nader. #2, I don't know, there might have been somebody else, peace and freedom candidate. #3, Gore, let's say. And then they would not have been able to blame the Green Party for the rest of the time. I still hear that. All people have to do is say, well, you can't vote for that person, remember Nader. That's all they say. So that's how it would work. And then what happens is that, let's say there are 5 candidates. And let's say nobody gets 50% or more. The idea is to get 50% of the vote, so that you don't have people that are get 45% or whatever. So the person who got the fewest votes drops out, and their second place votes get added to the person that's higher up that didn't drop out yet. And then that keeps going. I'll give you a real life example that did happen. So San Francisco got it in about 2003 or 4. And then Oakland, where I live, got it in 2006. That's when we approved it. By the time they dragged their little feet and got it in place, I think it was 2010. But Berkeley, in between, also got it approved. Oakland got 69% approval. I think Berkeley was about that, a little higher maybe. And San Leandro, the city council actually put it in. Okay, so here's what happened. By the time it was implemented, in Oakland there was a mayoral race. There was Jean Kwan, who had been a city council member. Rebecca Kaplan, who was a city council member, and Don Parada, who was he was well named. He was like he was like a political boss for the Democratic Party in that area. So he was termed out in Sacramento. So he, like so many other people, decided, what the heck, I'll become mayor of Oakland. He's on a list that includes Jerry Brown, Ron Dellums, and so he just figured it was his turn. So we have ranked choice voting, and he gets the most votes of any of the other 3 candidates. But it wasn't 50%, so he didn't win because it was ranked choice voting. And so the candidates that got the fewest votes dropped out until it got down to where it was just those 3, and Jean Kwan kept inching up, and Rebecca Kaplan as well. And then Jean Kwan won because of ranked choice voting. And she was the first, in a couple of ways, the first woman ever and the first Asian ever to be elected mayor of Oakland. And I understand that Don Parada said, I don't understand this ranked choice voting. Why didn't I win? And I wanted to, have a chance to say to him, let me break it down real simple. The majority of the voters in Oakland did not want you. That's how that worked. And so Jean Kwan became the mayor. It also, in San Leandro, there was a mayoral race, and the city council and the mayor had all put this on the ballot. They thought it was a good idea. The mayor lost behind instant runoff voting. And then he wasn't so sure it was such a great idea. Wait a minute, I'm not so sure about that. So it opens things up. When we were, I'm going to get to our process and sort of some tips about how you might do it here. But first I want to bring it from the 2006 up to the current time. And Maine had an awful governor who was elected with, first he was elected with 30-some%, and then he was re-elected with 40-some%, not a majority in either case, and against 2 others that were more, this is the governor of Maine, 2 others that were more progressive than he was, but he got in because he had the plurality, not the majority. I forget his name. I looked it up the other day, but it's sort of it's a interesting name, but it's not in my head right now. So because of that, they were ready for a change, the citizens of Maine. And so they decided to implement ranked choice voting at the state level. And so that's the first time that a state has done it. There are a dozen or so cities that have done it. But Maine did that because they ran into that twice, where they had this bombastic, way right-wing governor when it wasn't what they wanted. And so they put that in place, and it worked for them, and now they have expanded it to where they're going to use it for president.
Wow.
They're going to use ranked choice voting for their presidential election. New York City just passed a measure where they're going to implement ranked choice voting. It's a little bit, it's not as, so often things that pass aren't as good as they could be, and this is one of those cases where it's just for the primaries. So they're just going to put it in for the primaries. Probably the Democratic Party wants to use ranked choice voting in order to get their strongest candidate. But New York City's huge, and it's a great step to have ranked choice voting and electoral reform that's in the right direction happen. Some not so great news in California is that although Governor Newsom did sign the public banking thing, so that in jurisdictions around the state made it far easier to have public banks, city banks, state banks, whatever. But he vetoed a bill that would have made it an option for the general law cities to have ranked choice voting. Because right now, there are charter cities that run according to their own laws. They have their city laws that govern their elections and all that. There are close to roughly 480 cities in the state, and 41 of them are, 121 cities, so about a fourth are charter cities. They have their own constitutions. They can decide, or their own charters, they can decide whether or not they want to use ranked choice voting. The general law cities cannot decide that because they use the laws of the whole state for the general law cities. And he vetoed it. Now, remember what I said about San Francisco, that was Newsom and Matt Gonzalez? Well, San Francisco liked the idea of IRV, but Newsom never liked it. And so I've just read an article about it, and it said somebody paraphrased a line in a movie, it's good to be the governor. The governor can decide, and so he said no to that. However, and so I looked to see what in Monterey County, the charter cities are King City, Marina, Monterey, Pacific Grove, Salinas, and Sand. Is that Sand City? And all the others, including Carmel and Seaside, are general law cities. And you can find out that you can obviously Google that and find out about the other cities. This reminds me, is anybody here from a county other than Monterey? Okay, you are. Anybody else? On that petition about reforming Prop 13, did you sign it yet?
No.
Okay, if you'd like to sign it, see me afterward, and I hope you do, because it has to go by county. So what county are you in?
Sonoma.
Sonoma. Oh, okay, I hope you and yours are okay about all the fires. Okay, so now the process of getting to this kind of reform, and again, keep in the back of your mind that what we really love to have is proportional representation so that we can grow more alternatives than the two corporate-funded, corporate-controlled big parties that we have right now. But the way that we can get into ranked choice voting is check to make sure that your city is one of those charter cities. And contact the League of Women Voters. I'll tell you the story of how we did it in Oakland, is that the League of Women Voters there were a few, a core, it's always this way, isn't it? There was a core group in the League of Women Voters that really wanted to deal with the elections and democracy. The League of Women Voters, interesting at that time, this core group was regretting the fact that the League itself was starting to go more toward issues rather than the system, than the electoral system. They were going toward issues because that was more attractive to newer, younger members. They were it was more appealing to them to talk about issues than it was to talk about electoral systems. And we were all, you know, as we were working on ranked choice voting, we're going, well then who's going to deal with the system? I mean, the League of Women Voters was the best organization to really deal with. I mean, we all remember, you may remember, 1988 or something was when the presidential debates, when the Democrats and Republicans made it so impossible for the League of Women Voters to do the presidential debates that the private group of the Democrat and Republican got together and decided how the presidential debates were going to happen from then on. And so, but the League of Women Voters was this entity that was working on the systemic issues, the good old boring, all-important systemic issues, but there was a core. And so they knew everybody in Oakland, everybody in City Hall, they knew them all. And so we worked with them. They contacted all the electeds, gathered as many endorsements as they possibly could. And it was Democrats, they made sure there was, usually in Oakland what happens is that if somebody's Republican and they want to stay in office, they switch to Democrat, you know, which is pretty easy because it's the same values. And so, but there was somebody who had stayed a Republican, so he was on board. So there was a Republican and there were Democrats and there were, you know, all of this. And what they decided to do was to try to get the city council to put the measure on the ballot, because that's a lot easier than collecting all those signatures. And so they worked on that. We really wanted Barbara Lee, who was our congressperson, to back it because her backing carries a lot of weight. And so we had in July, we were really working for that because we wanted it to happen for the November ballot. We wanted it to happen before they went on their breaks. So you need to know when they're going to go on break and all that. So, but we didn't get it. Didn't get hers, but we got a whole bunch of others. And the last city council meeting before they went on their August break, there we were, and we were just, and the main thing that we tried to say was, all we're asking is that you let the people decide. Let the people decide. Let the people decide. You don't have to be for this or against it. All we're asking is that you let the people decide. And we didn't know going in there which way Ignacio de la Fuente or any of these other people were going to go. But it was just that was the steady message, you know, just let the people decide, let the people decide. San Francisco's already done it, you know, Berkeley's done it, some people, you know, it's been out there, we're not the very first. And then they voted yes. And so then it was going to be on the ballot, and we didn't have to collect all those signatures. But if you have to collect all those signatures, the good thing is now a whole lot of people know what it is. At that point, it's instant runoff voting. Oh, what's that? More people know what it is now. You still have to explain it, you know, because if people haven't used it, it's, you know, it's good to get an explanation. And so it was on the ballot. And I should have brought a sign, but we decided to use red, white, and blue on our signs. You know, patriotic, you know, it's red, white, and blue. And it was Measure O, which was great for Oakland. And we just said easy as 1, 2, 3 was the main thing that we started. Easy, it's easy as 1, 2, 3. Vote yes on O. And we sent out emails and stuff like that. I don't know, 2006, I don't know how much Facebook and Twitter there was, but we kept gathering more and more and more endorsements, and you have to write the ballot statement, and we chose who was going to be on the ballot statement, you know, Republican, Democrat, and all that. And then we still kept trying to get Barbara Lee's endorsement. And she gave her endorsement, even though she had talked in favor of it before. She gave her endorsement about 12 days before the election. So the absentee ballots were already out, you know, but it's like, and being on her door hanger, you know, on her list of the measures and the propositions and things like that. But so she did that, and I guess I can't help but say that later, it's so hilarious. Fair Vote is a very good organization. Fair Vote. Go to Fair Vote and you'll find out a lot about ranked choice voting. Wikipedia is great because it has a list of every place that has it. But so about a year ago, I went to something that Fair Vote and some other organizations had about electoral reform. And Barbara Lee was there to get an award on behalf of Ron Dellums, who had passed away a couple of years ago and who was one of those carpetbagger mayors. I think he was actually grew up in Oakland, but you know, that they come to Oakland to be mayor after they're turned out of every place else. So she was there to accept an award. And she wasn't on the initial announcement, but she was there later on behalf of Ron Dellums. And the reason was that when it came to implementing IRV, we had already passed it, and it took them a couple of election cycles before they implemented it. One of the things that San Francisco did that we did not do in Oakland was a date certain, was that they had to implement it by X date. And I think now there would be no reason not to do that. A date certain, you know, have that be part of the measure. And I think there was some reason that we backed away from that. So they stalled and they didn't do it in the next election. And then the following election, Ron Dellums got this award because if the city council had a tie as to whether or not to implement it in the next election, he would have voted yes. So that's an award-winning thing to do. And meanwhile, I was sitting there going, and she wouldn't even endorse it. We sweat bullets trying to get her. But, you know, that's a little bit about how politics works. So I mentioned, actually, we are at the point where if there are questions, which I would love, I love Q&A, because even if I don't know the answer, you know, I can read, somebody else in the room might and will have references. But do Fair Vote, I'll mention that again. And I'll also, which I may have mentioned before, but Evolve-CA, that's about the Prop 13 thing. And my website is very simple, laurawells.org, so it's just my name.org. And I'm checking out if I said, there was one thing that we also want to go for. You know, George mentioned the 2/3 approval for the budget. What Prop 13 did, and a lot of people don't realize this, but this is one of the reasons why the less money you have, the more tax rate, you know, the higher your tax rate is. To raise taxes, Prop 13 put the requirement as 2/3. 2/3 of the legislature, and then a lot of times 2/3 at local jurisdictions and things like that. You need a 2/3 vote to raise taxes. What kind of vote do you need to lower taxes?
50%.
Simple majority. So anytime that the California would have a surplus, then they'd lower taxes. Why? Because, you know, that's, your funders really like that, you know, the people that give you campaign contributions, and then you can't get it back. You can't get it back. So they had 2/3 for both the budget. You had to have 2/3 to pass a budget, and you needed 2/3 to raise taxes. So the one thing that they changed was the 2/3 to pass a budget. But they did not change the 2/3 to raise taxes. They did not lower that. And of course, we in California, in our legislature, has had 2/3 majority Democrats, and they still won't pass taxes on the rich, and we all know why. Okay, but that's something that we want for the future, because that's what, you know, there are a lot of tax the rich things, but this Prop 13 will get us started. And ranked choice voting puts a chink in the armor of the two-party system, and it's just way too easy to, you know, to buy out both parties. That's the problem. So, any questions?
Before we start questions, I want to pass the hat. We have to pay for the use of the building. You all know that, most of you know that, so.
I just want to see you wear that hat. Okay, I saw you first, and then we.
Could you explain a little more clearly, for me anyway? I understand that you vote your first, second, and third choice, but how is that tabulated? How is it counted? How is it used to figure out the winner? Could you give us an example, be more clear?
If this still doesn't answer it, then you'll make sure I do answer it, so it's clear. But let me give you the example of Don Parada and Jean Kwan and Rebecca Kaplan, and use that as an example. Because, so Don Parada got more votes than anybody else, but not a majority.
You mean more number one, first place votes?
First place votes.
Okay.
He got more first place votes than anybody else. Jean Kwan and Rebecca Kaplan were much closer in values to each other and different from Don Parada. So people who didn't like Don Parada a lot of people liked both Jean Kwan and Rebecca Kaplan. So a lot of people ranked one of them first and the other one second. And they didn't rank Don Parada at all. So when, let's say there were 5, there may have been 8 candidates or whatever, but let's say that there were 5. The 5th candidate, the candidate who got the fewest first place votes, is taken out. And a whole bunch of those people that voted for that number 5 ranked somebody number 2, second. So let's say that person ranked Rebecca Kaplan second. Then Rebecca Kaplan gets another first place vote, gets another vote.
Because she was second.
On
You
somebody.
tabulate them as, now
On
she's got
somebody
second.
whose ballot, on
number
somebody
2
whose
vote.
ballot would have been thrown away because their first choice didn't make it, their second choice was still good, and Rebecca Kaplan got that. And so let's say there are a few more, and a bunch of them, for this 5th place person, liked Jean Kwan, so she got those. But they didn't like that, you know, they didn't give second place votes to Don, so he didn't get anything. So he's staying here, and the others are inching up.
And is there any quantitative difference? If they got a second place ranking, does it count as much as a first place ranking?
It's a vote.
They're equal.
Yep,
So you do it round by round until somebody gets 50% plus 1, right?
right. round by round. Then the fourth one, the fourth one gets dropped out and those get
Yeah.
placed. And so he stayed, an analysis of it was that the people that placed him first, that voted for him first place, they were more conservative, less progressive. They didn't want Jean Quan or Rebecca Kaplan. But the people who wanted Jean Quan and Rebecca Kaplan didn't want Don Parada. Yeah, so the fifth place, the vote is gone. And then you go to the fourth and you and you take that, then that person is gone, then the second place votes from them get rearranged, Wikipedia is a pretty good place, Wikipedia isn't accurate on everything, but it's pretty good about quantitative things. And it has examples, or you could look up Jean Quan. It shows, it'll show you a chart where it'll say the first round, the second round, the third round, the fourth round. So you can sort of see how the numbers start to shift and how Don Parada went like that, and Jean Quan was going like that, and Rebecca Quan was going like that.
I can see the advantage to third parties, for sure, and for other situations. But I'm wondering if the places that have this implemented do it differently, or whether they all follow the same rules. Like, do they have the same number of choices? No.
No, there are different,
Implementations.
right, yeah.
So you would have to be alert when this, that gives a great deal more complexity.
It is complex, and one of the things about it that while there are different algorithms, different processes, that they do it, like, for example, you might not be limited to 3.
Right.
KPFA radio, if anybody, you can rank all of them, or I don't know that I don't remember whether there's a limit or whether you rank them all. So you just rank them from 1 to whatever it is, 25. So yeah, there are differences like that. The complexities, for the voter, it's easy. It is as easy as 1, 2, 3. You rank it 1, 2, 3, and then some differences in how it gets. It's definitely better than having a plurality win as opposed to a majority. And different systems will come up with slightly different results and stuff. So that's a factor.
Is the outcome that maybe their priorities, their values are more what's getting promoted than the personality? And are you seeing that in the way that they're voting now that they're elected officials?
One of the things that I'm not sure I caught your question, so repeat it if I don't. But one of the things that it reminded me of was that I forgot to say it really reduces negative campaigning. Because you want somebody who's close to your candidate to rank your candidate, to rank you. For example, I live in Oakland. Somebody knocked on my door. I went to the door. It was Jean Quan. And she said, "Hi, I'm Jean Quan." I already knew that. But I'm running for mayor. And I said, "I'm green." And she said, "I would appreciate your second place vote." Immediately. "I would appreciate your second place vote." And I said, "Thank you." And then she was off to the next house. And Jean Quan was a city council member, was one of the people that was an endorser of IRV when we were trying to get it approved. And people were saying, "Oh, those politicians, they just try to figure out what's gonna help them. That is true. That is totally true. But Jean Quan had gone to UC Berkeley, and they used ranked choice voting in their elections at Cal. And one of the significant things that had happened, and it happened again for her when she became mayor, was that the people who are usually left out are more likely to come in. Women, people, that are, Asian, Black, that more likely to win because they're not like automatically discounted as well. They're not winnable, or they're not as likely to win, or whatever. People can vote for them. And so she came by her endorsement of IRV totally honestly. She had seen it work and was totally in favor of it. But you will find the elected people that their calculation is, how will this affect me? What will this do for me? And it doesn't always, sometimes, yeah. But that's where, let the people decide, let the people decide. Is it a democracy or what? But did I get your question?
Yeah, I think kind of. What I see a lot for campaign reform is the people who are successfully using what's already existing. They don't want to give that up, right? And
Right.
a lot of times we're stuck in these personality things, or they look around the room, who owes me and who do I owe in this room? It's very personal, rather than sticking to the values. And sometimes when I even talk with Republican politicians, we can sometimes agree on things like expense, like we don't want this to cost a lot of money, and we can agree on that value.
Yeah.
So are you seeing that in the outcome of the voting of these people who get elected by ranked choice? Do they actually vote on value also? Do you see your values going forward versus personalities going forward?
I think it reduces the effect of personality, and allows you, because it allows you to be more specific about what your values are and things like that. It's also, so it helps to increase voter turnout, because people feel as if their votes will count more. That like if they don't want to vote for the most likely winners, they have a chance to vote for somebody who isn't likely to win, according to the media and all that. And so people are more likely to vote, and that's also true with proportional representation.
Is there an issue with undervotes? Like if a person only votes for the number one person, or votes for 1 and 2? Seems like you could exclude.
Yeah, some people don't want to vote for that. They don't. That's all they want. And so that happens, but not, so when they do studies about it, and again, check fair vote for statistics and things like that, that they've studied it. I mean, Newsom, when he vetoed this bill just like a week ago, said that it needs more study, blah, blah, blah. He was always against it. But it's had lots of study, and people do understand it. And 1, 2, 3, and some people only want to vote for one person. But a whole lot of, enough people, when they do the studies of it, they realize that enough people get it. Some vote 1, some vote 2, some vote 3. They do surveys afterward, particularly, because it was new. Did you understand it? What do you did? And yeah, people get it. It works.
So what effect does that have if you just vote for one person
Well,
instead of all
then,
three?
if you vote for one person, and your person, to use the Oakland example, if your person was Jean Quan, then your vote got her to be mayor. If your vote was for the number 5 person, then, your vote didn't get, you lost, the person that you voted for lost.
So each municipality chooses how many rounds the votes go through?
It's not the number of rounds. The rounds depend on how the votes, see, somebody could get 50%, and often do. Often people get, a candidate will get 50% in the first round. That's the end.
Ah.
But sometimes it'll go you know, 3 rounds, 4, 5. I think governor of Maine went maybe 2 or 3 rounds. The Jean Quan thing, I think, was 4 or 5. You know, but often enough that one person gets more than 50. In the
Yes, we had
Larry, I
Larry.
think behind you, just, and then.
Thank you. Now, I keep going back to the Trump as president because millions of Democrats didn't bother to vote.
Right.
And if Democrats had had the choice, a chance to vote for somebody else before Hillary, they would have voted for somebody else and somebody else, and then maybe Hillary may have been their third choice.
Right.
But millions of Democrats just didn't bother to vote because too often we have to vote against who we want to lose instead of for who we want to win.
Yeah, I remember a news, radio newsman said that he was explaining to his daughter how his daughter, you know, like, you really need to vote. You know, it's very important that you vote. She said, well, that's great. I'm going to vote for Ralph Nader. And this must have been 2000. And he said, I really found myself in a, you know, consternation because he was of the mind that you shouldn't do that, but he didn't, you know, but he was embarrassed to say that to his daughter, and he should have been. But it's this embarrassing system that we've got.
The question a few years ago was that we needed paper ballots. We needed to get rid of those voting machines. Now that we have paper ballots, I'd like to know how the ranked choice voting is counted. Is it done by machines? Is it possible to do it by machines?
Yeah, you know, like, yeah, what is it called?
They're electronically read, one
Yeah.
of your little black.
Yeah, because you've got to fill in the circle, you know, just like when you did standardized
Scantrons.
tests in high school and things like that. Make sure you fill in the whole circle, don't just put an X, don't just put a check mark, you know, because they're, what
So
do
what
they call
happens
those
if your
things?
vote is rejected because you went out of the lines?
Yeah,
No, what happens then? I mean, do they contact you and
It's
have
like
you
a
do
chat.
it correctly, or is it just gone?
if there's,
Right, a proofreader or something?
If there's
Yeah.
a question of voter intent, they do try to figure out,
right,
real human people try to figure out the ones that the
Yeah.
machine kicks out.
Yeah.
They kick those kind of votes out, and they kick the paper ballot out, so it goes into a different slot, and a manual review will be made of that ballot.
Thank you.
Seems like an audit would be hard.
an audit. Well, because you've got, just enter into a database what the rankings are. And
I mean, you know, physical audit, not a machine
yeah, well, you've got to have
audit.
a,
Most of the audits are done by visual, by hand, you know.
yeah, I don't know, actually. I do know that the machines are not the problem. That you can have, if you have machines side-by-side paper ballots, like the system in Venezuela. Jimmy Carter said that Venezuela has one of the best electoral systems ever, and that does not stop anybody inside or outside of Venezuela from saying that the elections are fraudulent. But what they have, and I've seen it in action, is that that you put your thumbprint, you know, your fingerprint in order for your ID, so they know it's you. And then and you cast your ballot on a machine, and then it prints out your paper ballot. And you look at your paper ballot to make sure that it's the same thing that you intended. And then you put your paper ballot in a barrel, and there are representatives of every political party in the room watching how it goes. And something like 55% of the polling places are immediately audited, where they compare the paper ballots to what the computer spits out, and, you know, right then. You know, in our country, as Jimmy Carter says, and as we all know, you cannot audit. Every county does it differently. You know, and so actually standardized automation with the paper ballot and with these other checks and balances is a good thing, you know, but it's just the way our system does it that makes it hackable and changeable and, whatever, corrupted.
Some
It's the
of the cities or counties that use that system of printing out your ballot, oftentimes back in 2000 and even beyond that, when it printed out what you thought you voted for, it printed out something different.
Yeah.
They could rig the machines that way too.
Yeah, as long as you have proprietary machines with proprietary software, you cannot be secure.
Right.
There's a big move now to have open source software in these machines, and then you can trust
Yeah.
them, because you can check them.
And where the person looks at their own ballot, it isn't.
Well, people would say they looked at their ballot and it was different, but they didn't want to bother with it, they just turned it in.
Well, that's a problem.
Yeah.
What if nobody gets, after 3 or 4 rounds, and nobody gets above 50%, do they still take the most plurality, wins the election?
Somebody will get 50%.
Somebody will eventually?
Yeah.
Okay,
It'll always get down to at least the last two.
okay.
And unless it's an
Right.
exact tie, somebody's gonna win.
Right,
Yeah.
And that's true.
Yeah.
I ran a small election like that, and it went through about 5 different steps, and
Right.
ended up in a tie.
Really?
There was only about 30 people voting, so
Oh, really? So what'd you do?
I think we flipped a coin.
I want to add one thing. Well, I want to add two things, actually. Invariably, people will vote the lesser of two evils, but there's always a lesser of the lesser of two evils. So if you vote for the lesser of two evils, and there's still a preference. It's still a preference. And if there's several in there, and if you have a second choice, it pays to make a second choice because it will count. It will ultimately count
Right.
until somebody gets 50%. It'll ultimately count. But what I want to add also, we're talking about a single winner race. This works when they're like a school board race, and you're going to elect 3 out of 7 or something like that. Whatever. There's 2 out of 5, say. You're going to elect 2. You can vote for 2. But you can also have choices about your 3rd place vote, 4th place vote, 5th place vote, and that will also get tallied up so that there will be 2 winners. So it's not limited to a single winner race.
Right.
It's a multiple winner race. It applies as well.
Right, like KPFA, for example.
Okay.
Yeah, good point. Audra?
I have a question from Facebook from Scott Schmidt. He says, will you support ending the top 2 primary?
Oh, heavens, yes. Yeah, I mean, the only decent thing about that, and it hasn't reached its potential, this possibility, is that there's no reason not to be green for 3.5 years, in between the presidential races. Definitely. The top 2, what that ends up doing, when I ran, in 2014 I ran for control. It's always follow the money, follow the money. Doesn't matter what they say, look at the money. Where are they spending the money? And I was again running on public bank. If I did nothing else in my life, I sometimes have to remind myself, because sometimes doesn't it feel like, what am I doing, I have to remind myself that when I ran for governor in 2010 as a Green Party candidate, and somebody told me about a state bank, and I really pushed it, was tax the rich, reform Prop 13, and a state bank. And I know a whole lot of people that I talked to during that campaign had never heard of it. And so they first heard of it because of the progressive think tank, that the Green Party is. So follow the money, follow the money. So that was 2010. In 2014, I convinced, whether or not she'll ever forgive me, I don't know, Ellen Brown to run for treasurer. As a Green Party candidate, and I think she has forgiven me. But so she ran, and she wrote the book. Ellen Brown wrote the book on public banking. She's the reason that I knew about it, that a whole lot of people knew about it. She's written books called Public Banking Solution, Public Banking, and really got people is a co-founder of the Public Banking Institute and all of that stuff. So Green, she ran as a Green Party candidate for treasurer. I ran as a Green Party candidate for controller. And we both ran on state bank, and I also ran on tax the rich. She was in a 3-person race, and she got 6.6% of the vote, which was in June of 2014. And that's a high percentage for the Green Party. And she actually broke my record. Which I happily, but I'd gotten like 5.7% when I ran for controller in 2002. It took them 10 days to figure out who actually won controller. They were like, who is Laura Wells anyway? But so that was, so in 2014, we both ran, and I ran in a 5-person race for controller, and I got 5.7% at that one. Yeah, the other one was 5.9% earlier. Anyway, she got 6.6%, and I got 5.7%, running against everybody. You know, so 3 Democrats, a Republican and independent, you know, whatever, and she ran against a Democrat and a Republican and herself. And I don't know which one it was. My fantasy is that people liked, why we got so many votes, is that my fantasy is that people liked the idea of women running the money in California. And we had these 2, you know, absolute Ellen Brown, Laura Wells, you know, names. Or whether they really liked the idea of public bank. And I think it was probably both.
I know we're here to talk about ranked choice voting, but I don't know what a public bank is and how it differs from, say, a credit union.
The one state that has a state bank is
North Dakota.
North Dakota. And one of the things that North Dakota, a couple of other things about North Dakota, is that it was not adversely affected during 2008. It did, because it wasn't tied to the Wall Street banks. It had its own bank. And another fact about it, when you mention credit unions, is that they have more community banks per capita than any other state, because the state bank partners with the credit unions and the community banks. It's not a consumer bank. It acts more like the Federal Reserve kind of bank, where it backs up the banks. Another example about the way that it works is that, like, a small business will have its, will do its banking with a local bank until it gets to a certain point. And then it grows, and then what happens is that the smaller bank doesn't have all the money, all the credit that the growing business needs. And so then they have an agreement with a larger bank. There's a word I can't think of at the moment, where they have, where they partner with this growing business. And of course, Wells Fargo, Chase, Citi, Bank of America are luring away the growing business. So then that gets taken out of the community bank and goes to Wall Street. What happens in North Dakota is that the state is backing up, acts as the partner to the local community bank and the credit union, so that they don't lose their business. They keep the business because the bank is the partnership. Another great thing that happens with, so that keeps the community entities, the community bank credit unions, stronger rather than weaker. And another thing that happens, you know, the Bay Bridge between Oakland and San Francisco was built recently. One section of it was rebuilt. Where did, you know how much, it's like 40% sometimes of the cost of it is interest. And where does the interest go? Outside of California, Wall Street. And whereas if you have a state bank, there's plenty of money. You have pension funds, you have tax, you have money that's sitting around that's not spent yet. You've got lots of ways to capitalize a bank, to have capital that you can lend out for public projects. And the interest, any interest that's paid goes back to the state, and the state gets to use it, you know? And so there's every reason in the world to have it be public. Just like we want public water, we want public banks, we want public, you know, there's some good things that are private, you know, the things you don't really need, jewelry, cars, you know, it's like those should be private, you know?
So they're not nonprofit, they are,
They're bank, they're a government agency. What they call the Bank of North Dakota is North Dakota doing business as the Bank of North Dakota or something. But it's, yeah, and they have professional people who run it. You know, it's not it's not politicians. Yeah, and then you.
Ranked choice issues?
Ranked choice issues?
Yeah.
You mean why not do it?
Well, I'm just, you know, we all have a list of issues, and a lot of us feel like our top issue isn't getting worked on. So, I mean, is it in the think tank, has that ever come up?
I'm not understanding the question.
Well, so let's say my top issue is climate change,
Yeah.
and 50% of the people here, it was their top issue, and 40% of the people, it was public water. So an election is
Boy,
held, and, you know, okay, we're gonna work on climate change, because more people think it's important.
wouldn't that be nice? Yeah, I mean, I realize, it would be nice.
What I'm getting at is like this whole idea of ranking choice is a powerful idea, and it could be used in other ways. it
Yes,
seems like.
yeah, there's a whole movement, a whole bunch of people working on different ways for participatory democracy. You know, everything from participatory budgeting to various ways to make legislation, you know, and one thing is, for example, that every initiative that would be on the ballot or measure on a city ballot or initiative on a state ballot would have a group of people looking at it to see what the problems with it are. Rather than have one author write the thing and not have enough, nobody has that much brain power to think of everything. You know, that they would have wisdom councils and things like that. So I agree completely. I mean, I get really tired of getting people asking, political folks asking for my opinion before elections when all they want to do is know what they need to say. They do not care about the fact that everybody thinks that the climate is important, or that, you know, our food or schools or health care or anything like that. They just want to know what to say. It drives me nuts. But yeah, you know, there's a bunch of movements, NCDD, National Coalition for Dialogue and Discussion or something, yeah, democracy, NCDD, but yeah. Those things, there are solutions. There are so many solutions. It's getting them to happen and getting, you know, chink by chink.
And about another better solution than ranked choice, you mentioned proportional voting. How would that work?
Proportional representation. Proportional representation, and again, it's like more than 90 countries use it. And it's...
Isn't that like parliamentary government?
That, they're related, but a little bit different. You can have one and not the other. So proportional representation. Germany, here's an example. After Fukushima, am I saying it right? The meltdown, the nuclear, then in Germany, they were going, you know, business as usual with their nuclear power. And then there was an election and big green vote, a much bigger green vote than they'd had before. And they went, oh, Okay, so there's an issue. Do you know that was able to say, no, people care about that, and they knew, why people were voting for it, and so then they started phasing out their nuclear power.
But don't we have proportional representation in the United States?
Don't we?
I mean, not disregarding the electoral college.
No, 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 no. No, no, I'll say it 5 more times. We don't. What we have are single districts. What first past the post, they call it. Fair vote, again, is a great place to go to find out about that. But, so, look at the Central Valley. The Central Valley has, I don't know how many congressional districts. Let's say it has 20. And they're virtually all Republican. Look at the congressional districts in the Bay Area. They're virtually all Democrats. Okay, if the Central Valley had proportional representation, for one thing, it wipes out gerrymandering. Forget this whole thing about just isolating, splitting up groups that otherwise would vote together. It has more, sensible boundaries. You have a 5-person district. And so people vote, and if you get 20% of the vote goes green, you have a green in Congress. You could have 20% of the vote going green across the entire state of California, and you wouldn't have a single green in Congress. But if you had 5-person districts as opposed to single-person districts, then you'd have a mix. Illinois used to have proportional representation, and actually politicians across the political spectrum liked it. Because when they were in there, even with people that they disagreed with, there were a lot of different points of view, and they could really wrestle with things. But the powers that want, all the power and money in their own hands, for some reason people have that psychological malady, they tried to get it every chance they could. They tried to get rid of it, get rid of it, get rid of it. At some point it hit a weak point and they got rid of it. So we don't have proportional representation in this country. One other thing about that also increases voter turnout, because you don't think, well, none of my people are going to make it anyway. It shifts the issues, it can help with the way that the issues are. And there's something else that will come up later.
They call it winner take all. That
Winner
really
take all.
is very
First
descriptive.
past the post, winner take all.
And that's the way we run it. So the
Yeah.
49% get no representation, the 51% get all the representation.
Right, right. And they finagle the districts, whoever's in power. And as they point out, people who study this, they say no matter how you do the districts, even gerrymandered or not gerrymandered, it's still going to end up being without proportional representation, you still won't have.
Have you been able to observe any change in campaign spending in the San Francisco, Oakland, ranked choice voting?
Thank you for asking that question, because that reminded me of a thing that I'd forgotten just a minute ago. So I don't forget that other one again. If we had proportional representation, the money spent in politics would not matter as much. Because people would say that my values are green, or my values are libertarian, or whatever, and I'm going to vote for that person, and they have a chance of winning. And another thing about that is that the markets, the media markets, is that they don't, it's actually, I don't always want to give the media a lot of excuses, because the main problem is they're sold out. Their advertisers are their customers. Our quarter or 50 cents never did pay for the newspaper. didn't pay for the paper it was printed on. They called the news hole, was what was left over after they placed the advertisements, it's the advertisers. But they did, but it is difficult to cover all of these single districts as much. But if you have a 5-person district, it's much easier to cover that, because the area could be roughly what your circulation area is. And you've just got one race to cover. And, you know, like I said, people don't have to spend as much money. I don't know what in terms of the effect with ranked choice voting on the money spent. I don't know whether it's had any effect. I would think so, but I don't know. And I do know, as I mentioned before, that it certainly reduces the negative campaigning.
Yeah, maybe the most impact would be for people who would be reluctant to run because they didn't have the big money behind them. So
Yeah.
it would be more incentivizing them to go ahead.
And run, because you have more of a chance.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you don't get, you don't get blamed. Well, I think we may have done it. Yeah, okay, well,